Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, how are you doing today, our new week?
Yeah, good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Doing fine, but it's budget time, and we have to, have this cloud come over. People are too giddy. They're way too happy.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong, and the Republicans are euphoric. And we should point out a few things that Republicans aren't perfect.
Yeah.
And there was a time in my life when I thought Republicans were the fiscal conservatives,
Yeah.
and the Democrats were anti-war. Wow.
That's
Look
changed.
at it now. It looks like they're both not fiscal conservatives, and they're both pro-war, at least most of their leadership. But no, it's I think it's this very day they're going to release next year's proposed budget, which means it's not a whole lot. It's a political event. And they're $4.8 trillion,
Yeah.
here or there. It's $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. But, there are some themes in it that we'll talk about it because there's some gimmicks. There's always some gimmicks. We're going to slash this and we're going to do this. But the balanced budget, I think this balanced budget is for 15 years out. That's when we're going to really cut. But in the meantime, what this country needs is a lot more military spending. We spend more than everybody else put together, practically, and we spend 10 times more than Russia, and yet Republican and Democrat have decided that Russia is the enemy and they're going to invade Europe pretty soon, and that's the reason why we have to build more and more weapons. So it is fraudulent, it is political. It's one of the things that, in spite of this argument that go on, I use as, when the two parties come together.
Yeah.
It always gets passed. And, last year, no trouble. By December, 3 months or afterwards, in December 20th, they finally passed this year's budget, but they paused from the impeachment hearing. So it always has to get passed. The military-industrial complex is always taken care of. Deficits are always perpetuated. The monetary system and the Federal Reserve is authorized and encouraged to monetize the debt to make everybody happy, because you can't disrupt things. This would be too much. And right now, things are, as far as I'm concerned, are getting out of hand, almost over expectations that they have found a golden calf. There's nobody cares. The establishment, guarantee that the stock market will never go down.
Yeah.
And the checks will always come out. Everybody gets paid, but we'll have priorities. We'll shift the money around. And the priority of Trump, he's probably being pretty straightforward, get more money into the militarism. And in spite of the rhetoric where some of us had hoped, hey, this guy might come home. And since we never took a peace dividend in 1990, maybe the peace dividend will finally come. But as I read this proposal, Daniel, I have to admit, I can't be very encouraging. So I'm looking toward you to encourage the people and say, don't get too down, don't get too depressed. This has to end somehow. But when and how it ends, I'm not quite sure.
It is a big spending bill, and as you suggest, the original promise is, we'll have a balanced budget by the end of my second term. Then it's it'll be 10 years. Now it's maybe we'll get it in 15 years. But the budget is kind of a charade in a way, that it's presented to Congress and it'll die in Congress. But really, the whole process is so awful. I remember it wasn't that long ago. Maybe we're getting older than we think. But we used to actually spend the year doing appropriations bills. You remember that? You go one by one and one by one, and you cut through them, and that's all gone. Well, today's budget proposal by Trump kind of plays into the hands of the Democrats a little bit, and I wonder how they'll run with it, because there's going to be some domestic cuts, apparently, although the administration assures us that these aren't cuts. They're reductions in the rate of increase, right? So, but EPA slashed by 26%, HHS 9%, education 8%, interior 13%, 15% HUD, urban housing and urban development, increased DHS, Homeland Security, because they got to build that wall, increase NASA because we got to get to Mars, and the Pentagon essentially the same, a little bit of an increase. So, you know, these numbers are from the Washington Post, of course, and it's trying to paint it as Trump snatching the welfare out of the mouths of Democrat voters and giving it to the military. I wonder if the Democrats will take it and all of a sudden start sounding a little bit more dovish.
And you know these cuts aren't going to happen, but the increases will, and that's what they plan to do. I see on top of the list foreign aid. You know, everybody should be against foreign aid.
Yeah.
Sending that money over to Ukraine and all those places. It's supposed to go down 21%, and to build a wall. But illegal immigration, as bad as it is, has gone down a little bit. And my opinion is walls aren't the answer. It's just eliminating all the incentives. But I remember the time, I guess it was 96 or so, the Republicans had taken over the Congress after a long time not having control of the Congress. So the foreign aid package came up, and I took a very, very strong stand. I remember way back then, the chief antagonist or protagonist against me was none other than Nancy Pelosi.
Oh, no.
And that was when you mentioned that we used to debate each bill,
yeah.
and it's an open rule until they get tired of it. Well, this was an open rule early in the debate on the bill, and we went for an hour and a half on it. And she and I did most of the talking on it. And guess what? She was real strong for foreign aid.
Yeah.
And
surprise.
But the Republicans were too. I thought, Republicans, they want to cut. And I remember when the bill finally came up for a vote, and I wasn't much into strategy and parliamentary things, but I was passing through the House. They were getting ready to vote for the foreign policy boondoggle, and the whisper was, no recorded vote, no recorded vote. And when I heard that, I ran right out. And it was one of those rare times that I was going to play their game. So I got in the right position and asked for recognition, and I wanted a recorded vote. And I'll tell you what, that was hard because I had to get a little bit excited and get their attention because they did not want a recorded vote because they've been fighting this all the time. Now they have to pass it. It's all such a shame, the whole system.
Surprised they didn't lynch you on the floor right there.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the foreign aid and the surprise that the conservatives are all for it, because as you've always said, it's not foreign aid. It's taking money from poor people here and giving it to rich people there. Conservatives like it because it enables you to coerce leaders overseas, make them do what you want, and that's why they like it and that's why they use it. So there's no taste in cutting foreign aid. That's dead.
And some of that money never leaves the country because you send it over there and they have, it's quid pro quo.
Yeah.
Can you believe that? We're going to give you a couple billion, but you're going to buy a F-35 or whatever.
Yeah.
And guess what? The money really doesn't leave. We just pay for the F-35 and they get the plane. Fortunately, the planes won't be very good at attacking us because they don't work very well. But I'll tell you what, the people suffer. It's part of the major problem that we have in this country. Excessive spending, all the lying and scheming that, yes, we believe in balanced budget, but next decade or so. So this continues to go on, but the day of reckoning will come because you cannot maintain budgets with trillion-dollar deficit. I don't know what they plan this year to be, but I'm going to make a wild prediction. There's going to be a bigger deficit this year than last year.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the F-35 and military spending, which is a big part of this, obviously. And there's such a disconnect between increasing military spending and making us safer. And the F-35 is a perfect example, and we talked about this before the show. There's a new Pentagon report out, the annual testing of the F-35.
Yeah.
Didn't get a very good grade. This is a $1.5 trillion project, the F-35, the life of it probably end up being a lot more. Well, I don't know. The testing didn't sound like it came out too good. Did you see some of those things?
The guns don't work.
Yeah,
they have a big cannon. They put it in the wrong place, and it just damages the ship. They can't hit a target. One article, this is just unbelievable. They said it couldn't even hit the ground.
Oh, wow.
It hit the ground, and they missed it. So this is always the pretense. I thought they can't use it. It's a 22. It's a huge gun, 22 millimeter. will be a huge thing. But I think if they can't use this gun, they spent these billions and billions of dollars on it, and how's this plane going to save us, from all our enemies? I got to thinking, the technology must be there. Just think, Obama was able to assassinate two American citizens with a drone.
Yeah.
Two guys in all the world are able to hone in with a drone. And some of you, I think, said, well, that's probably one of the reasons why we have to turn this F-35 into a drone aircraft.
Yeah, really.
Gee.
But this is the perfect retort to those who say, well, we got to fully fund our military. We got to spend. No, you're not doing that. You're wasting money. You're wasting money on things that don't work. And here's some more things from that report. 13 must-fix problems on the plane before they can go forward. 873 software deficiencies in the plane. Would you want to fly a plane like that? It's pretty terrifying. And it still has cybersecurity vulnerabilities. But here's the kicker. I saw this in a Bloomberg piece, Dr. Paul. This says everything. Quote, despite incomplete testing and unresolved flaws, Congress continues to accelerate F-35 purchases.
I have a theory, and you know the theory, and there's probably a lot of truth to it. They didn't give it to one company in one state and reward that state because the other states would. Why should we? It's military Keynesianism.
Yeah.
It's a jobs program, and they have to admit to it. So they were very smart evildoers.
Yeah.
They say, well, everybody should participate. That's democracy. So they take bits and pieces so that every state essentially builds part of this airplane, including Israel and some other foreign
countries,
and they all come together so nobody votes against it because you don't think that there's a quid pro quo in politics. Oh no, that you don't have any benefits by voting for things we don't need and things that distract. It's probably the most amazing thing is that we do as well as we do, but I think we do very well because it's artificial wealth, that it's a fiction, and it's also the people who suffer are hidden. That's a Democrat statement, so we can't say that too long. But no, they say that it's a big problem, but they won't admit it, and therefore they keep spending and spending. But someday, and the whole thing is, for defense. Nobody can vote against defense.
Yeah.
But they're not voting for defense. They're voting for militarism and the military-industrial complex. Weapons traders, and it's very, very lucrative, and it's a big business. So it is amazing that we can do as well. But I think right now the euphoria is artificial to a large degree because we have a stock market which is sky high. And I saw one other statement that where the problems are, and they say, well, that's not a big problem because they'll just take the next step. We're going to use helicopters, which is the Bernanke suggestion that if the money won't go down to work its way downward, we give it to the banks and the rich. If it doesn't go down and help the average people, we get helicopters and drop the money onto them, which is I'm sure just a point to make. And I think they will. I don't think they'll ever stop sending checks out. They'll always pay checks, but they cannot guarantee the value of the currency to last, no matter how powerful we are, because right now, and we talk about it all the time, is our foreign policy is sort of shaky. We're not quite as powerful, and some countries are standing up to us. And financially, when the world stands up to us as the empire and disapprove of what we're doing, then financially at the same time, that could add fuel to this fire, and that's when we better be on our toes and really working hard to try to preserve some liberty that we still have.
Yeah. And I know you're right about these helicopters being bad, but I wouldn't mind if some of them were hovering around our studio right now, dropping some money. But we also noticed a good article from William Hartung in Defense One, and he made the point that we want to sort of come back around to as a way of starting in a way, which is that overspending on the military is not based on actual threats. more spending on military doesn't mean more safety, doesn't equal more security. And Hartwig makes this very important point. It's not based on actual threats, because the people who create the threats, the people who create the national defense strategy, these are the people, they imagine these threats. These are the foreign policy elite who imagine the threats. And the proliferation of threats is their ticket to the kind of lifestyle they enjoy. So in a sense, they have a stake in this whole thing. More threats, more money, more prestige, more jobs, more power. So you can't really trust them.
And the ultimate insult with a policy like this, if you think of Vietnam and Korea, it's the same old stuff. We weren't being threatened by the North Koreans. We weren't being threatened by the Vietnamese attacking us. Our liberties weren't being threatened. We were being threatened by going into war. So the victims are the people that actually believe they're doing their patriotic duty to volunteer and even go to places like Iraq and Iran or Iraq and Afghanistan to fight for our liberties. And they come home. If they come home, they can come home without limbs. And it's done with noble intentions, and they're made to be raised on a pedestal. I feel just that's such a tragedy, because I feel for these people because of the ignorance that goes on the people buying into this, building up the enemies. And we witnessed and talked about it and tried to point this out, all the lies going on and the pretense of our enemy coming to destroy us, especially in this century.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll just close by saying, we had a really good show on Friday. We had pretty good turnout for people watching it. We had Tulsi Gabbard on as our guest. So if you haven't seen that show, go back and check it out. And while you're at it, subscribe to our channel at YouTube so you can see all the shows. We've got some other good, exciting guests coming up, that even a couple of this week. So keep your eye and keep tuned onto the show. And by the way, as I mentioned last week, May 23rd, we will have our Houston conference, smaller venue, more intimate. We'll have some details this week. We're just ironing through a couple of final things before we make the final announcement. So keep your eye on that. We'll certainly let you know here on the program. Thanks for tuning in.
Very good, Daniel. And we've been talking a lot about the spending and how they spend it and how they waste it. But it boils down to the foreign policy. And when we were talking to Tulsi Gabbard, she uses the word non-interventionist in foreign policy. I'd like to expand that viewpoint a little bit. But in foreign policy, she's a non-interventionist. But there's no mention in all of the budget, the trillions of dollars we spend and all this militarism. It has nothing to do with thinking about policy. Think about our policy that creates and helps creates our enemies as well. But I think we're our own worst enemies because of these policy. But the foreign policy has to be dealt with, and it's rarely mentioned. Other than demagoguing it, because then you get to the point where there's a lot of confusion. I mentioned early on that, Democrats, they used to think that being against war was good. At least in the 60s, they pretended to do that. And then right now, though, there's no pretense at all to argue the case, except for the few, to say that there's no reason we have to have a foreign policy. There serves no interest our benefits to have interventionism and defend it with militarism and printing press money, manipulating the elections around the world, putting our troops in 150 countries. It doesn't work, and it's going to come back to haunt us. And I think when you look at the efficiency of our military, when you look at the F-35 and a few other things, we ought to be more cautious, and we ought to spend more time on trade with people and friendship trade with people and traveling around the world, and not looking for an enemy, not looking for the monster to destroy. It doesn't work. So it's time people paid more attention to a non-intervention foreign policy based on the principles of liberty and non-aggression against other countries. That will give us the peace and prosperity I really believe most people want. Thank you for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.